Why the New Orleans Pelicans are finally starting to click. So far early on into this young NBA season, the Pelicans have done a really nice job at making certain improvements to make themselves better overall. And when you look at the record in this young NBA season, I actually do feel as if it's indicative of some of the improvements they were able to make this year. And after years of struggling, I finally feel as if the Pelicans are starting to figure things out. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicySports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Ever since the New Orleans Pelicans acquired Zion Williamson, they were always seen as one of those younger teams that had the potential to have a lot of success in the future. Besides even the star piece of Zion Williamson, they also had a really nice young core to back him up, as they had Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball at the top, but they were also littered with talent throughout their roster. But although the Pelicans were seen to have a lot of talent on the roster and have the potential to have a ton of success in the long-term future, it just seemed like season after season something would go wrong. Whether it came down to some on-the-court executions, whether it came down to some trades they were able to make or not able to make, or probably most importantly, once it came down to the health of Zion Williamson, there was just a bunch of different factors that limited the Pelicans in the short term and probably also in the long term as well. But after a couple seasons passed and the Pelicans weren't really showing all that much promise, people started to forget about this team. Because although the Pelicans did have a lot of talent on the roster, they also at the same time moved on from some of those young guys that a lot of people thought would be a main part of their core future, talking about Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart. Now, although I will say in that Josh Hart trade, the Pelicans got a pretty nice addition in CJ McCollum, but I just think the Pelicans were going in a little bit of a different direction from what most people expected when they originally acquired all these younger guys. Because although when the Pelicans were able to acquire CJ McCollum, he was able to bring a nice leadership role to this roster, and he was able to help this team have some success last year. I don't think when they brought in Zion Williamson and all these young guys, they were expecting to have as little success as they were able to have over the last 3 or so seasons. So a question that some of you may be having at this point is, what changed? Why do I think things are clicking a lot better for the Pelicans this season than they were over the past 3 or so years? Well, I think it comes down to a couple of different factors, but the first and most obvious factor I want to touch upon is the addition of Zion Williamson. Now, obviously, as I said before, Zion was always on the team for the last 3 or so seasons, but he wasn't always available. Whether he was out for the entire season or whether he was out for a portion of the season, it didn't really matter. At the end of the day, Zion wasn't healthy enough to really start to build a chemistry with a lot of these players on the roster. Because as I mentioned in a lot of my videos, whenever a team adds a significant player to the roster, there's always going to be that adjustment period. Whether that takes a full season, whether that takes a half season, or even more than a full season, regardless of how long that transition period is, it's just something that has to happen. And when you talk about Zion Williamson, I do feel as if he never really had that adjustment period with this Pelicans roster. And especially when you consider the fact that a lot of these guys on this roster are very young, it would probably take even that much more amount of time in order for these guys to feel comfortable playing out there with Zion Williamson. So I do think the fact that Zion has been very healthy so far during this very young season, but during the regular season so far and during the preseason and training camp so far, I do actually think that's a huge thing for this Pelicans roster, and I think it just gives them that much more time to really click with their main star in Zion Williamson. Because when you look at what Zion's able to do out there, it's pretty clear that this guy's a generational type talent. When he's out there on the court, he does a great job at putting up 25 or even 35 plus points on any given night on very efficient shooting numbers. He does most of his damage driving all the way to the basket, but also besides that scoring ability, he has a really nice ability to facilitate for guys as well, which is something that's very unique for his position and size. So I think a lot of what he does out there is just going to benefit everybody else out there on the court and make everybody better. And I think the fact that these guys have had more time to feel comfortable and more time to train with Zion is only going to be a benefit for them going forward long term, and I do think a big reason for why they're playing a little bit better this season than they did in the past is due to that factor specifically. Now, the next factor for why I think the Pelicans are a little bit of a better team this year than they were in the past is due to some of that playoff experience that they've had. Now, as I mentioned before, ever since Zion made it to the Pelicans, they haven't had all that much playoff success, as they really only made it to the first round and had some playoff play-in game experience, but aside that, they haven't had all that much success. But with that being said, the fact that the Pelicans have had some playoff experience at all is actually going to be a very beneficial factor for them. Because at this point, they understand what it takes to make it to the playoffs, as they've already done it. They understand what it takes to make it to the play-in game, and regardless of the lack of success they had once they made it there, at this point that does serve as somewhat of a learning experience, as some of the things they might have done wrong in the past, and now they have a better understanding of what they do to make some adjustments to those issues that they faced. And when you specifically talk about a very young roster like the Pelicans have, I think it's extremely important for these guys to have some playoff experience, and also at the same time, I do think it's extremely important for these guys to have some failure, because as we all know, failure is a very good teaching lesson, and I do think there is a lot of lessons to be learned about some of the failures they've had in the past. But overall, when I look at this Pelicans roster and I watch them play out there this season, I am extremely pleased about what I'm seeing. The Pelicans are doing a much better job so far during this early season than they were able to do in the past at just running a consistent and efficient offense. They're running nice plays out there, they're getting easy looks for their main guys and even easy looks for their supplementary pieces, but besides that, probably most importantly, they're doing a pretty nice job defensively as well. And at this point, it just seems like the Pelicans are in a really good place. A lot of their players are healthy at this point, they're doing a really nice job at buying into what their head coach is selling, and I'm just a huge fan of a lot of the things that the Pelicans are doing at this point, and I am extremely excited to see what they could potentially be in the future. But the next question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, what are my specific expectations for this Pelicans team this year? Well, in my opinion, it's a little bit tricky. If Zion Williamson is able to stay healthy throughout the most part of the season, my expectations would be much higher. But if Zion isn't able to stay healthy for the most part this season, my expectations would completely change. But with all that being said, I do think Zion has done a really nice job going into this season at making some lifestyle changes to ensure that he stays healthy, or ensure to the best of his ability that he stays healthy for the most part. When you just watch Zion out there, it's pretty clear that he's in much better shape than he really ever has been in the NBA, and I think he's done a great job at losing some of that fat and some of that muscle from the top half of his body in order to ensure that he's not putting as much stress and tension on his knees to potentially get injured. But if Zion is able to stay healthy throughout the most part of the season, I fully expect the Pelicans to make the playoffs. I think they can easily be a top 6 seed in the Western Conference. I think they're that talented, and even once it comes down to the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if they're able to make it past the first round. Although, as I mentioned, the Pelicans weren't able to have all that much success in the past, I do think they're a little bit different this season based on a lot of the things that I mentioned in this video. But if Zion isn't able to stay healthy for the most part, my expectations completely change. At that point, I would see them as a play-in type team. I still would think they would be good enough to make the playoffs as a play-in type team, but once they made it there after losing a player of the caliber of Zion Williamson, I just think it would be very difficult to have any level of success in the playoffs once they make it there. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening for Zion and the Pelicans this upcoming season. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Pelicans are a different team this year than they were in the past, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.